So we're going to begin talking about Jesus' conversation. Again, another conversation that Jesus has with someone. We don't know her name, the woman at the well. The curriculum says, or entitles it, Jesus confronts the woman at the well. I think confronts is too strong of a term, and has confronting someone has a negative connotation, right? If someone confronts you, nobody wants to be confronted. You want to be confronted? No, we don't. Oh, you do? Okay, well, I can do that for you. I think that Jesus encounters, or Jesus dialogues with the woman at the well is probably a better. Um, so what we have happening here is Jesus is going to leave Jerusalem to go back to Galilee. So after this is used a number of times in John. After this might mean the next day. After this might mean the next month. I don't know. We don't know. But after the conversation with Nicodemus, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. Now, he's on his way back to Galilee, and don't make too much out of this. Jesus was baptizing, and it says, later that Jesus wasn't baptizing; his disciples were. But he was baptizing. We don't know where. The curriculum thinks they know where. I don't know. I don't think we can know that so much. So what part of Israel does the Gospel of John mostly focus on? Yeah. Nope. Yeah. Judea, Jerusalem, specifically in Judea. The feasts of Jerusalem, and more specifically the Passover feast. So we have the wedding at Cana, that was in Galilee, and now Jesus is leaving Jerusalem. The first Passover recorded in John, and he's going back to Galilee. So this is one of those parts of John that deals with Galilee. Now here's what it says in the first 3 verses. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself didn't baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. So he's on his way from Jerusalem to Galilee. Let's look a little bit. Let's go back. So he's been in Jerusalem, and he's making his way north to the area around the Sea of Galilee, Lake Tiberias. And he's going to come into this middle part, which is called, or was called, Samaria. We'll talk a little bit about how that happened and how it came to be a place. So verses 1 through 3 emphasize the truth of John in John 2. Jesus says God knew everything. He knew what was in a person. We're going to see that again in this conversation with the woman at the well. And the Pharisees are taking interest in Jesus, but not in a good sense, right? They're taking interest in Jesus. They're concerned about Jesus, what he's teaching, who he is. Remember, he cleansed the temple, and he was suspect from that time on. So he decides to leave. Intentionally, he decides to leave. I think he knew that he was getting attention that he shouldn't be getting just yet, because his hour had not yet come. But what you need to understand is that Jesus is in complete control of this situation. He orchestrated the timing of his death. He knew exactly when it was supposed to happen. And it's not time yet. And so he was not going to allow himself to be to be taken before it was time. He was becoming very popular, both in a good sense and a bad sense, and he didn't want that. He ran from that. He also ran from his death coming before the ordained time. He escaped arrest many times because the hour had not yet come. God had a specific time for his birth and a specific time for his death. I love Galatians 4:4. I love this phrase, fullness of time. Here's what it says. But in the fullness of time, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so as to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoptions as sons and daughters of God. Here's what fullness of time means. At the very right time, at the exact right time in history, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those under the law. Jesus was born at the exact right time in history. How do we know it was the exact right time in history? Well, it tells us that here. But we can look at some things and we can surmise some things about the world in Jesus' day. The whole area, the whole known world at that time, was ruled by the Roman Empire. Now, there were some bad things about that, but there were some very good things about that. One was, it's called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Here's the good thing about an empire. There's relative peace. Now, if you've got someone like Nero, he's mean and nasty and life's not very fun, right? But there's relative peace because nobody's going to pick on the bully, right? And so there was peace during this time. The Romans made a number of improvements to the world that allowed the gospel to spread. There were roads. Before that time, before the Roman Empire, it was very dangerous to travel and very difficult to travel. But the roads that they built and the aqueducts that they built and the number of things, improvements that they made not only made life easier within the Roman Empire, but it allowed people to travel, which allowed the gospel to spread. Also at this time, there was a singular language. Everyone knew Greek. That allowed the Bible to be written and read by the average person. Because everyone knew Greek. It was a lingua franca is what it's called, a universal language. So when this says in the fullness of time, it was the exact right time for Messiah to come. It was God's appointed time for Messiah to come. So Jesus came with a specific purpose. And he was dedicated to fulfilling that purpose. He was dedicated to do his Father's will. As a 12-year-old boy, Jesus went to Jerusalem with his parents for a feast. They left. They assumed that Jesus was in the entourage. He was not. He was still in Jerusalem in the temple teaching the old guys. His parents, frantic, and I can understand this. I had a hider. I am going to name names. Lane loved to hide from me. He thought the most hilarious thing he could do when we were in a crowded shopping area was to go hide from me. And I would look down and I'd be, where's Lane? Where's Lane? And he, like one time he was in this rack of clothing, like this circular rack of clothing. And all of a sudden he comes out and goes, hi! And I'm like, I'm going to get you. I was so upset at him. That he would do this all the time. He thought it was hilarious. It's not, as a parent. You're frantic. So I understand how Mary felt. Where's the kid? They all just assumed he was somewhere. And all of a sudden, have you seen where's Jesus? Where? And they start looking and they realize We don't have Jesus. We've lost the Son of God. And so they go back to the temple. They go back to Jerusalem, and they find him in the temple teaching. And do you know what his answer was? Well, close. I've got to be about my Father's business. I've got to be about my Father's business. Jesus was dedicated to doing everything that God asked of him. Would that we have that attitude. So here's the place and the people. It says in verse 4, and he had to pass through Samaria. Now, quite literally, and I don't know if I have yet, quite literally, if you're going to go from Jerusalem to Galilee, you have to pass through Samaria, right? That's the most direct route. There were Jews who refused to walk through Samaria. They'd walk around Perea and Decapolis and back up to Galilee, or vice versa, going from Galilee to Jerusalem. But verse 4:4 tells us he had to go through Samaria. Why? Why did he have to go? He could have walked through it. Yeah. It was his father's will. And his father had some business to do. So in Samaria, there's this little town of Sychar. And it stands at the base between two mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim are famous in Old Testament history because it is there that Joshua gathered, once they were in the land, he gathered the people in Sychar at the base of these two mountains, first to appropriate the land and give each of the tribes their section of land. But he also had his elders, one group on Mount Ebal, one group on Mount Gerizim. And he wanted to teach the people the word of the law. And so not only did they hear the word of the law, but from one mountain they would shout the blessings of obeying God's word. And from the other mountain, they would shout the curses of disobeying God's word. And Joshua, George, he commands the people to obey God. And they're all like, we will obey God. We will obey God. And I remember teaching on the book of Joshua and telling my sister about this story, my youngest sister. And she said, it would all be very encouraging if you didn't know the story of Judges, which is the next book in the Bible, where the people decided they did not keep the law of God. They did not obey God. So this area is very well known. So Samaria, as I already said, is, here's a picture of it actually. So this is modern day Sychar. I think this is Ebal and this is Gerizim, but it might be the other way around, and it's nestled between the two of them. By the way, Jacob's well is still there. The well that Jacob dug, Jacob of the 12 sons, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you can go visit that well where Jesus had this very conversation. It still has water in it. Now, do you want to go to Israel?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing to see the place where Jesus had this conversation with the woman? So that's a picture of it. And so you've got Samaria between Judea and Galilee. Now, this is, okay, right now, right here, right now, you will have an essay on what I'm about to teach you. You want to write down as much of this, and there's not going to be blanks in your book, but somewhere in your book or somewhere, you want to write this down, because I'm going to expect you to remember it. You're welcome for giving me the heads up.
Thank you.
So we have at some point Israel split into two kingdoms. They were united under King David. They were united under King Saul. After King Saul, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, this shouldn't be new to you. We already talked about this. His two sons had a fight over the kingdom, and the two kingdoms ended up splitting into the northern tribes and the southern tribes. Galilee to the north, Judea to the south. The northern tribes were the first to fall. They fell to the Assyrians. So Sargon, the king of Assyria, captured and destroyed the 10 tribes that lived in the northern part of Israel. Actually, Israel was not Galilee, was the north. Israel was the north, and Judea was the south. And he took many of them captive back to Assyria. By the way, the south fell too, just not for a while yet. And they took with them most of the people that were of any importance. And they left behind some other Jews. They also left behind a garrison. They also left behind an army to keep the people under control. People in that army intermarried with the Jews who were left behind. And not only did they intermarry, and so their actual lives intermingled, their views of life and religion intermingled, so that the religion became this mix of Judaism and paganism. So these people were of Jewish blood, but they were also of Assyrian blood. And they adopted many of the ways of worship of the Jews, but also the ways of the worship of the Assyrians. When the people returned from exile, they found this mishmash of not only thinking, but believing and life. And so to an Orthodox Jew, to the Jews who had been carried away and remained Jewish, they were, I'm going to use a pejorative term. Please know that I'm not believing that term. I'm just letting you understand it. They were half-breeds. They weren't pure. They weren't fully Jewish. And so they were looked down upon. They were hated. So when John tells us that Jews and Samaritans didn't hold things in common, that's a really nice way of saying they hated each other. They were enemies of one another. And so they had disgust and disdain for the Samaritans. They were looked upon with disgust and disdain. They were hated. And even to go from Galilee to Jerusalem or from Jerusalem to Galilee, they would walk around sometimes to avoid having any contact with the Samaritans. By the way, that is today. So Jesus, for whatever reason, was compelled to go through. He wasn't going to go around. He had an appointment, a divine appointment with a woman there. And so he left and went through Samaria, which was the most direct route. But that's not why he chose it. He knew there was a woman there who needed him. Who needed the saving grace of God, and who would influence others for Christ. Did I put? I'm just going to read this first part. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" And then it says, "For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." What that is saying is that they have nothing in common. They have nothing to do with one another. They are completely separated from one another. Which is why the parable of the Good Samaritan is so powerful. Because you've got these priests and these Levites and these religious people seeing this man almost dead on the street, and they just walk by. And along comes the Samaritan who takes care of him. No, Samaritans don't do that. Samaritans are nasty. Look, kids, this story has a lot to tell us about prejudice, about racial prejudice in the church, in the world. When you turn to Revelation, here's what you see. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation worshiping together before the throne. For his kingdom. And if that's how it's going to be in heaven, ought we not have every tribe, every tongue, every nation worshiping? Many years ago, a church that we were partnering with at the time, a South Omaha Hispanic church, came to lead worship for us. To this day, it is my favorite memory of worship at our church that we've been attending for 22 years. Because they were leading worship in Spanish, songs that we knew, and we were singing them in English. And to hear multiple languages worshiping God was such a beautiful thing. I love it when I go to Zambia and they're singing songs in Bemba, and I don't totally understand what they're saying, but I love hearing their voices singing a different language. One time we were singing a song, they were singing a song, and they were singing number one, Jesus is number one. And I turned to my friend Marjorie and I said, "What's number one?" Number one. This is number one. They were actually singing in English. I just didn't understand that they were singing in English. God desires for us to live in community as brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless of race. And we need to be doing that. We need to be seeing one another as first and foremost brothers and sisters in Christ. There is no place for racism. There's no place for racism in the Christian heart. I'm going to give you one little piece of advice before we end for today. Seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Seek to understand the story of someone else before you decide to tell them. We're done. I think we're going.